Welcome to We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only show dedicated to the process and strategies for transforming apartment buildings to thriving communities. I am your host, John Brackett, and welcome to the show. All right, folks, welcome to another great episode of We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only place where you can come to learn how to take apartment buildings and turn them into amazing communities. So, hey, today I have another great guest, and today we're going to have a conversation with Mike Glaspie. I got that right this time, right, man? All right. So another great conversation, another great show here. I am your host, John Brackett. I would like to welcome Mike to the show. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, very welcome. Really glad to have you on the show. So I'm going to introduce you to our audience, invite them into this conversation by sharing your background and your bio. So Mike Glaspie is a commercial real estate broker in Charlotte, North Carolina. Mike received his bachelor's degree in business administration, and he's currently pursuing a master's in business administration. So he served 10 years in the U.S. Army, with a majority of that time spent in special operations as a Green Beret. So, hey, man, appreciate you. Love you for your service. And since purchasing his first investment property in 2014, Mike switched his focus to creative investing. So in less than 3 years, he completed several transactions in a variety of ways, such as subject to seller financing, wholesaling, flipping, syndications, and buy and hold. So at this point, he currently holds over, 100 rental properties and some short-term, I like this word, arbitrage in multiple states. And he's also a co-founder of several investment companies. So Mike, welcome to the show, man. This is going to be a really good conversation, especially with your background, because there are going to be a lot of parallels that we can talk about, right? Some of the things that you've learned as a special operator, right, that has carried over into the world of real estate investing. So really appreciate being here, man. Love you again. Thank you for your service, and excited to have you on the show.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome, man. Awesome. So Mike, let's start by doing this. Why don't you share your background, right? Maybe start by sharing, how it is that what led you into the Army and then Special Forces, and then from there the transition into real estate investing.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm from the greatest country in the world, Texas.
I did know that.
Started off there. It started off there. So what happened was I went to college and I started, my dad was very, very stern. He said, hey, if you're going to go anywhere, you have to kind of be, self-made. You have to find your way. So I was trying to work multiple jobs, but then I found out that the military does assist with college payments. So I jumped right into it. I said, hey, well, I can make worse decisions in life, so let me go ahead and join the military. Well, literally within about 6 months after I joined, I left Texas for the first time in my life. I actually got on a plane and I jumped out of a plane, all within that short time frame. And being young and full and energetic, I decided, hey, let's go all in. So by the time I graduated, I come from a mindset of we don't just do things to get by, we try to do the best at everything we do. So once I started researching some of the options in the military, lo and behold, I found this program called Special Forces, becoming a Green Beret. So after I went through the entire selection program, which is about 3 weeks, you then have to enter a 2-year pipeline of training. And, by the grace of God, I made it all the way through. And I started going everywhere. I deployed multiple times to many different countries, learned different languages, learned different skill sets and different jobs. But I had a series of back-to-back bad deployments, and I've lost a lot of friends. And at that point in time, I had to make a very critical decision. I had to decide whether I was going to stay in and reach that 20 years, which is the pension mark for the military, or if I wasn't going to find another way. And so I started looking for other opportunities. I've tried everything. I was mentioning this to you earlier, everything from MLMs to Uber driving and all these other things.
Right.
But what I realized was I was already house hacking at the time. I was already renting out rooms to some of the other single soldiers that was in my unit. So at that point in time, I decided to kind of go all in with this thing, was, see what real estate was all about. The military doesn't pay you much. So I had to get creative very quickly. And I did the typical trajectory where I started off with wholesales, and then I started moving into live-in flips, and then, fix and flips. But I started finding other creative options like subject to or seller financing, rent to own, lease options. And once I started realizing that I could just work a little bit harder, save up some of this capital, and then turn a very small amount of capital into a big return, that really started opening up the floodgates for me.
Right.
After that, I was just all in. Yeah, I just went in. And for the next 3 to 4 years, I've been doing nothing but real estate.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, man, really appreciate the summary. And I really like what you said, right? About taking a small amount of capital and then turning that into a big return. I mean, that's a great way to summarize this business if you, I think, do it the right way, right? One of the great things about real estate, man, is there's just a lot of different ways to do real estate. There are a lot of different ways to invest in this space. That's why I love it, because it's constantly evolving, constantly changing, tons of opportunity in this space, and nothing is ever stagnant, right? Nothing, not in this business. So I really love how you explain that. In fact, I think I'm going to borrow that from you, man.
Yes, steal it. I'm a big proponent of creativity can solve all problems. It really can. It really can. And,
right.
In the military, they teach us to do more with less, right? So it's like, hey, we're not going to give you the best equipment. Here goes an old M16 and a handheld compass, an analog compass. You better go figure it out. I feel like it's the same way in real estate. If you allow your creativity to kind of flourish, you can figure out anything.
That's right. That's right.
It's only a how.
That's right. Well, so let's pivot a little bit. Talk a little bit about what you're focusing on right now, because we're in kind of a unique market, right? With your background, you've been doing this for quite some time now, enough time where you have exposure to, where you've gotten exposure to quite a bit of opportunities, right? You've seen a lot, you've seen enough rather to be able to create more forward, right? So what are you focusing on right now? What are you doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm taking advantage of some of the side effects of the pandemic currently. There's a lot of people who's got a little bit over leveraged, or they bit off a little bit more than they can chew. And when the pandemic hit, it kind of put them in a financial bind. So I am still searching for off-market properties. However, I'm looking for twofold. One, small portfolios of multifamily properties, anywhere from 20 to 50 units, as well as limited stay hotels. Those are my two primary categories that I'm currently looking at.
Okay, and then elaborate on that. Why the smaller multifamily, and then of course the limited stay hotels? Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to multifamily in general, everybody knows the economies of scale. If the portfolio is close enough, then for all intents and purposes, we can almost evaluate it like an apartment complex. The difference between a smaller multifamily and that of an apartment complex is we can get very creative on our acquisition process. So with apartment complexes, typically you're either going to need that new loan up front, or we're going to have to do something like an assumption and pay back the equity piece. But when you actually have individual units, you can get very creative. For example, there's one strategy where if it was close enough to you, you can use a homeowner occupied loan to acquire one of them, right? And then use that as a down payment to sell or finance some of the others. We call that the max bang method, right? It's kind of some kind of creative that we brought up, but we've actually done that in the past. And by knowing that you now have access to residential loans and commercial portfolio loans, you now can get very creative with how you kind of divide and conquer that portfolio.
Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about the max bang method, man. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's get some max bang today. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the max bang method. So if I heard you correctly, you said that you could leverage a residential loan, and then you could also couple with that a commercial loan or commercial financing. So my guess would be that maybe you're pursuing properties that are 4 units or less, right? 2 to 4 units as well, and leveraging that with conventional financing, right? 25% down. And then, for anything above 4 units, so 5 units plus, you're looking at financing that with commercial loan.
Yep.
Okay,
correct.
cool.
So, yep.
Go ahead.
I'll give you another example. I'll give you a real world example. So we had, there was 5 quadruplexes or 4 units under one roof. They were each individually parceled. All right. So what that allowed us to do is we were able to get a commercial loan for 25% for 2 of the buildings. Right. So we put those 2 together and basically made that an 8 unit. We were able to potentially come in with a VA loan. So 0% down on us for one of the buildings. But then we were able to say, hey, we can close on these two over here and this one. So that's 3 total, but we want to seller finance the other 2. And that gave them a substantial amount of money to pay off their previous liens and allow us to come in very creatively with twofold. So we really only need 25% down of 2 properties to acquire all 5. So that's why we call it the max bang, because it's a very creative approach.
Gotcha, man. I like that. I like that. The max bang. It sounds like something out of a James Bond movie, man.
We're going for it.
I love it, man. The max bang. I wish I had one of those echo sounders, right? Where you say the max bang and the background goes, the max bang. Bang, bang, bang. Hey, man, I really love that. So you know what? Here's what's cool, Mike. I really agree with the approach, right? Because oftentimes, man, I think you have to be able to take what the market has given you, right? And that's what you're doing. I think it's very smart. You have to be able to take what the market's giving you, but you still have to also be able to be willing to work outside of the typical constraints that the market has placed in front of you, right? Meaning you have to be creative. We have to take what the market's giving us, and we have to be creative to be able to maximize value, right? So an example of that is right now, 30-year fixed financing, man. I'm closing on a property in Texas, right?
Nice.
Favorite state, man. Favorite state. 2.625%, right? Second home. I mean, 30-year fixed. That's just ridiculous. I mean, I never thought the last time I said that I would. There was no way I'm going to be able to see those kind of rates again. Was in 2009 or 2010, maybe, right? And sure enough, right now we're in 2020. We just don't learn, right? So rates are plummeting, going down again. And now, fortunately, I've been able to capitalize on that opportunity, right? And some other opportunities like that as well. But the point there being is, you got to be able to take advantage of what the market is offering up. 30-year fixed rate money, man, solves a lot of problems, meaning it reduces or eliminates a lot of risk. As long as you're buying, at a favorable price with 30-year fixed money on that, cheap money like that, that in and of itself is a deal, right? The financing is a deal. And so long as you're buying favorably and you can execute on management, I think the financing, man, solves a lot of problems. And it sounds like that's what you're doing right now, right?
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head when you said as long as you can approach it favorably. The beautiful thing about real estate is we all know that it works in cycles. It always works in cycles. But whether it's in a peak or a valley, there is still a strategy that is very effective for real estate. And as long as you understand how to hedge against as you're doing these things, it's perfect, right? So right now where prices of homes are at an all-time high, even with this crazy, thing going on, like you mentioned, long-term financing at all-time high.
I like how you said that, man. You called it a crazy thing. But isn't that the truth, right? Like you got to be, sometimes, man, I think to myself, I just got off the phone with a buddy today and I was thinking, I go, man, what in the world is going on, right? Where you have the market, the stock market, record highs off of refinancing corporate bonds or corporate debt from already inexpensive debt to now practically free. And that's what the earnings are being driven off of. It's just the craziest thing, man. So anyways, I laughed when you said that because it's so true. Sorry about that. Go ahead, man.
No, it really is. It really is. Everything is wild. When you look at our unemployment rates are skyrocketing, health care systems are being overran, and yet, like you mentioned, the financial world seems to just be peachy. So
yeah, right. Absolutely.
So you have to be creative. You have to be resourceful. That's ultimately what it comes down to. And I'm a firm believer that there is always an opportunity to invest in real estate. There's a lot of people that say, I wouldn't buy right now, or I wouldn't do this. To each is your own. But I feel like there is an appropriate strategy for every curve of the real estate cycle.
Yeah, and I think that's the right mindset to have, right? Because I'm a big believer, man, in when everyone's making a left, there's an opportunity to make a hard right, and there's going to be less opportunities there, but they're going to be higher margins. They may have more complexity to them, but I think it's worth the risk, right? At least that's been my approach, and it's worked well, over the years. So I agree with what you said, and I think it's counterintuitive, but I also think it makes a lot of sense because capital is not free, right? There's always a cost to capital. And so finding the best way to deploy capital, I think, is really important. And it's not just about risk, but it's also about maximizing the return relative to that risk, right? And there are a lot of different ways to do that, man. So I really appreciate that comment. So Mike, I'm gonna pivot a little bit and start talking or asking you some questions about hotels. So I know that, limited stay hotels right now, some opportunity there. In fact, likely quite a bit of opportunity. And hotels are very unique in that they share some commonalities with how you would underwrite to an apartment buildings, right? Or apartment building. There's some parallels there. So talk a little bit about, why that space in this market, okay? And what are the parallels that you've learned thus far? What are the parallels between, a hotel, or in this case, a limited stay hotel, and an apartment building, and some of the opportunities that you're seeing right now in this marketplace?
Absolutely. So with limited stay hotels, as long as we're not focusing on the large luxury hotels and things of that nature, the primary source of income is through room rentals. When you think about an apartment complex, the primary source of income is through those leases, right? Now, there are some additional sources of income that most apartment complexes may have that we also can demonstrate in the hotel market as well, to include vending machines, whether it's pet care, anything of that nature. There's opportunities to create additional income streams. Now, the reason we like limited stay hotels is we found that the price or the cost of entry is very low. It's very minimal, right? So it doesn't require tens of millions of dollars. You can acquire some of these properties from anywhere from $2 to $5 million, right? Which makes it very affordable in comparison to a lot of these larger apartment complexes as well. In addition to that, because the cost of entry is so low, you'll find that the typical owners aren't necessarily institutional. They're still mom and pop. And when we find those mom and pop owners, it allows us opportunities to find distressed properties or just ownership that are in financial disarray, which allows us to get those off-market quality deals. So once we started identifying that there was a great opportunity within that niche, we naturally had to partner with somebody who understood hotels in depth. And that's exactly what we did. We partnered with a regional hotel manager who's professionally trained in hotel management, and he personally flips hotels as his full-time job. So once we were able to identify that, we brought them on as a general partner, and we're now searching and acquiring limited stay hotels within certain market areas.
Okay, cool. So talk a little bit about the markets that you are acquiring in, and then how are you financing those properties?
Yes. So the financing, again, we're always creative in everything that we do. So in the markets that we're looking not necessarily in major metropolitan areas, but we do want them to be along major highways in between large metropolitan areas. So obviously, if you go to any major city center, the price of everything goes up. But we can find some of these tertiary markets are just en route between the primary and secondary, primary and tertiary markets at very discounted rates. And typically what we find is that the people who own them, they own several hotels. However, they live primarily in the primary market, so they let those kind of go to the wayside, right? Those are a little bit that are further out. So it gives us a prime opportunity there. Now, as far as financing, again, we are looking very similar to apartment complexes. We could come in with fresh debt, but there's also opportunities to do loan assumptions, which is our primary play. We'll assume the primary loan that's in place. We'll do a seller financing back in on the last little piece of equity, and then we'll look to refinance in a year or two, and then ultimately exit in anywhere from 3 to 5 years.
So it sounds like what you're pursuing is you're pursuing smaller hotel opportunities that are owner operated. So possibly you're running into quite a bit of SBA financing, right? Hotels that have been financed with SBA loans, likely a 7A loan, potentially a 504 with a seller carry for the business portion of that. So with that being said, what difficulties are you running into, if any, when you have an SBA loan in place and you're looking at negotiating an assumption of that?
So the primary point, the primary hurdle is the simple fact that we need to qualify for the loan as well. It's not just as simple as we can just assume it. We have to go through a full loan underwriting process as well. In addition to that, because most of these smaller hotels, they're franchised, right? We won't do just a standalone independent hotel. We're looking for the franchise hotels, the Red Roofs, the Redwood, the Best Westerns, things of that nature. We still also have to get qualified through the franchise. So that process within itself takes quite some time. And then typically when we get the properties under contract, because we're doing some sort of loan assumption or a short sale or something of that nature, we don't necessarily have the liberty of a very long due diligence process and a long purchase period. We have to come in and typically we have to close within about 45 to 60 days. So we're accelerating everything in our timeline as far as due diligence and everything of that nature. Okay,
cool, man. So I really appreciate that. So, you know, one of the opportunities, also one of the challenges with SP financing is that they have limits, right? Yeah. They're limits. So I don't know if the limit, I think it used to be 5 million. Maybe it's gone up to 6 million now. But, you know, unless you have a fairly deep bench of partners, you know, you're only using one partner typically for one. With each hotel that you buy, you're likely going to use up that limit for that particular borrower, right? Or guarantor. So how are you working your way around that in this market?
So what we're doing primarily is through syndication. And so we haven't ran into any loopholes with the loan product types as far as how we're raising the money. We typically do a 506B. We don't really have a necessity to do a 506C. Typically the loan amounts are small enough. But we go in and our partner, our general partner, he has enough experience. His portfolio of hotel management is quite large enough. And he has those relationships with those franchises to where he's able to kind of pull out that card when it's necessary.
Gotcha.
And kind of ride on his coattails when it comes to that nature. Now, as far as raising that capital and assuming that loan, bringing in that equity position, I guess it's 506B, and we don't typically face that hurdle from the lenders.
So are you financing all of that purchase with equity, or do you have some debt in there as well?
Yeah, so the assumption would be the debt for the most part. And then if we carry back the equity piece, very, very small raises though. Even though we're acquiring and controlling anywhere from 2 to 3 million, our capital raises are anywhere between 200 to 400,000. That's how much we're carrying on. And here goes a perfect example. Since we've already closed on the deal, we were able to come in and assume it we purchased it all in at about 970,000. The assumption itself was about 640. So we raised about 300 for that majority equity, and then we raised another 100 for project improvement. So all in about 400,000 capital raise. It immediately appraised for 1.7 million. So we walked into about 800,000 worth of equity. The exit strategy is to get it anywhere between 3.3 and 3.5, and then we're going to go ahead and sell it. So in that situation there, we're walking in, we're able to assume that's going to be our debt carry. And if we do need to bring a fresh loan, we can. But a lot of times we're able to come in and get it even for a discounted rate or a quick short sale scenario. And then we raise that small equity portion and increase its operational efficiencies, and then we work on the exit.
Nice, man. And so what is the target room count that what's that sweet spot, right, with these smaller hotels?
So we definitely want over 50 rooms. We want over 50 rooms because once you start looking at economies of scale, if you're working and operating anything lower, it's going to be very difficult to kind of manage that expense ratio and really get some good cash flow. The real sweet spot would be like that 75 and plus. If we can get it somewhere around there, then we're really in it.
And so for the one that you just acquired, how many rooms was that?
It was 57. I was 57.
So I'll tell you a funny story, man. So back in 2009, I had an opportunity to buy a hotel out of bankruptcy. And I negotiated a sweet deal, right? It was on a ground lease. Sweet deal, man. I negotiated the improvements for $500,000. Okay. It was on a ground lease in the South Pacific. And I grew up there, so I knew it really well. The attorney that I was working with, that I was negotiating the deal with, very, very difficult to work with. Okay. She was extraordinarily difficult to work with. So finally we came to terms. We came to terms via LOI. Then I involved my attorney, put together a purchase and sale agreement. And, we opened escrow with another attorney there in that region. And so I flew out there to do my due diligence. So let me fast forward. What they didn't know was there were 3 years left on that lease. Okay. 3 years left on the ground lease. So essentially, there's a bank loan that was for the improvements. Okay. There was a ground lease in place. The owner of that ground lease and of that land, I grew up with him, right? So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be great. I'm going to go back there, purchase the land, and just let this thing lapse. And just take title to the improvements. It didn't really go as planned, but that was an opportunity, man, very unique. I ended up backing out of that deal for a couple of different reasons. But one of the biggest reasons was I just didn't have the operational experience. 5,000 miles across the world, right? And there are some advantages in that the cost of labor very inexpensive. At the time, cost of labor there about $1.20 an hour, right? Okay, so some unique opportunities there, and also just another opportunity to give back to that community because, hey, man, that's where I grew up, right? So I was a little bit personally invested or vested, maybe a little bit too much, because I made some poor decisions as a result of that. But the point there being is I backed out of that deal because of just a lack of operational experience, and I wasn't very confident that I was going to be able to do that effectively and manage everything else that I had going on here while having to learn an entirely new business, right? So I bring that up because you were smart enough to bring in, a regional operator, someone with a history of operational experience. How has that helped you inside of this space today, what you're doing now?
So I will say, to your point, everything that I have accomplished in my entire life was because of the help of others. There's nothing I have done in my life that was purely my effort, right? So all of my acquisitions, a lot of it just came from the opportunity for people to lend me private money, right? It came from the sellers giving me the opportunity and giving me the trust to carry that seller financing. And then a lot of my partners, I have partnerships in some of my holdings, all right? So the ability to leverage out my weaknesses so I can focus on my strengths has been paramount in anything that I've done. So I firmly believe that partnership is the only true way to scale at a rapid pace. Otherwise, yeah, you can absolutely do it yourself. It's going to take just a little bit longer. So by partnering up with him, it's been beautiful. We get to focus on the things that I'm strong at, which is business, operations, the structuring of things, dealing directly with investors. He's managing the hotel itself, the assets. He sends me his reports. I can quickly review it, send it out, right? And it just makes a beautiful synergy when you have those key roles and responsibilities, and everybody understands their role.
Right. So it sounds like in this case, you're on the acquisition side, mm-hmm. right? You have a template that you underwrite to. He reviews it or she reviews it to assess whether or not there's an opportunity there, and if there is, then everybody takes the next step, whatever that next step is. Okay, I love it, man. And that's really smart. And yeah, I did not do that. I was like, oh man, yeah, I pulled a special ops, man. I got parachuted into the South Pacific. I pulled a special ops with no training, no gear. And it was like, let me see if this guy survives. and I barely survived, man. I barely survived. So that was a good lesson. Yeah, Mike, I've over the years, man, have amassed what I call a master's degree in making mistakes. But fortunately, I've been able to convert that into some opportunities, right? And so I don't regret anything along the way. Some things are fairly painful going through that, but I think the lessons learned from that, man, have been 10, 20 fold, right? So I can't say that. I look back and I go, okay, I should have done that differently for sure, but I just don't regret going through a lot of these things. But for sure, that's one thing that I had to learn the hard way, is making sure that I involve the right people at the right times, right? And so I've had to get I've had to improve that over the years, just because of some of the experiences that I've run into, which not bad, just a little bit more challenging than I needed them to be.
I'm a firm believer. There's no such thing as a loss. Like you said, it's only a lesson learned. And it's crazy to see how people will, they'll go out and they'll spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a degree to go and get an education that turns around and more than likely may only give them a career up to about $50,000 in salary. They'll spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they won't spend $10,000 to test an investment in real estate. Yeah. To me, that's the cost of tuition.
So here's, and that's a great segue, man. And I live by this, right? And I really try to instill this in my kids. My oldest daughter, she's already there, my 22-year-old. But some of the reasons why I started doing that is it was the best way I could force myself to learn, right? And I know that if I put myself in positions where they're very challenging, I will find a way to the finish line. Now, the challenge with that is you cannot always do that and be productive managing multiple assets, right? That's the challenge with that. But if I know that I have the time and the return is big enough, I will force myself into a situation because I know I'll figure it out, right? But the return has to be large enough because I'm taking time away now from other opportunities, right? And so it's really funny that you say that. It's kind of a counterintuitive way to do business. However, what I can say is it's the only way to take 4 years of education and collapse it into 6 months, because you're forced to do it, right? You're forced to learn when you have your own money on the line and you're up against a timeline. And so for me, I actually enjoy that, but where it failed for me is when now you're scaling and you're managing multiple assets, right? Because your time is only valuable when you can focus it,
yes,
right? And leverage other people. So anyways, man, I really appreciate that comment because it's so true. And you said it really well, right? I mean, that's a great way to articulate that. So let me shift a little bit. Okay. So now we're in a situation right now, man, COVID-19. All right. You've been wise enough to position yourself for the challenges that we're going through right now and how to mitigate against those challenges, but also how to put people in place to scale, right? To leverage your time wisely. So where do you see the opportunity over the next 6 months? Well, let me ask you the question differently. You and I both had some sarcastic laughs about this market right now being amazing, right? Okay, when a lot of data is showing the total opposite. Okay, so where do you see the distress in this market over the next 6 months? And how are you taking advantage of or positioning yourself rather to be prepared for that?
I think one of the biggest stressors right now is the lack of travel. Now, this is going to be funny because I just literally came back from Mexico during this whole thing. There's everybody in the airport. Everybody's going everywhere, right? However, in the news, right, they're saying that travel is being restricted, banned, not advised.
I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah,
you just say it how it is.
Yeah, I'm just being honest. And so the thing is, what we realize is our best performing assets right now are short-term rentals. Not only in the hotel space, but we have Airbnbs that are having, at most, our Airbnbs have, I think, 5% vacancy at most. And if that's the one where you're getting a daily rate, we've been able to 3x our typical gross monthly income just by changing it over to Airbnb. Now, the operating expenses are a little bit higher, right? We have cleaning, we have turnover, and we still use property management because we leverage out everything. But nonetheless, we've been able to essentially increase our profit margins by 3 or 4x just on Airbnbs. And what I've realized is a lot of people, and we leverage everything. So, we have a property manager, we have an Airbnb stager, we have, basically anything you can think of, we don't do our hands on. But we're able to create that model and then in turn pass that on to our clients. And most of the objections are, well, what happens when COVID gets changed or whatever, and Airbnb is no longer a hot commodity? Well, I'm a firm believer of everything has multiple exit strategies. Airbnb is nothing but a furnished rental unit that we're now just using short-term rentals. And Airbnb arbitrage is even better because we never even purchased the property. We just put down a security deposit. But let's say everything changes and Airbnb is no longer there. Well, we probably already made our money back on the furniture. So let's just now put it as a long-term rental, but charge a premium because it's fully furnished, right? And so I think right there, that's a segue, or that's a small niche that's just not really being explored to its maximum capacity. Because as we're starting to see individual prices of homes and apartment complexes, cap rates being compressed so aggressively right now, we're going to hit that little bubble soon enough that it's either going to flatten out or it's going to dip. So we need to be optimizing our cash income, our cash flow currently to put us in position to start acquiring them when that dip or that flatten does actually take place.
So I'm gonna add to that, man, because I agree that there's some opportunities here. So some of the properties that we've been purchasing in this market, one of the ones that I just spoke to you about in Texas, has been just that, right? I'm a big believer in that when market's going left, you got to go right, but you also have to take what the market's giving you. And right now, I think one of the best opportunities that the market is giving us is cheap 30-year fixed rate financing, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Cheap 30-year fixed rate financing. So Airbnb, I've never been a fan of until this market, right?
Same.
Because,
absolutely. I agree.
Because the data supports that in the United States, irrespective of what's going on around us, we're so individualized. We're such an individualistic society that irrespective of what's going on, man, it could be pandemic. It could be pandemic, right? But we still want to go out, man, and do our thing, right? And we'll spend money to do that. And in many cases, I can totally understand because I've done the same thing. Okay, I've done the same thing. So for me, the way that I looked at this, I go, you know what? And also when you look at the data too, right? Like one of the data sources that I use and have been using is All the Rooms. Okay, you pay for it, really good data source for short-term rentals. Very, very good data source for that. And, the data is very telling, man, and it's very surprising. Not only does it talk about the markets that are capturing that type of business, Tennessee being number one for, I think, obvious reasons, but there are a lot of little hidden markets, okay, many of them, ironically, in Texas, North South Carolina, basically the Sun Belt states, right? Okay. But the point there being is what the data has taught me is that, even though international travel has shut down and slowed, people are still willing to spend money, man, on their sanity here in the United States. Because the U.S., we're just a very amazing country, right? This country is so amazing that the rest of the world, man, could be experiencing turmoil, and here very different. And you'll really appreciate this, right? For me, I grew up in another country, so you'll really appreciate this. The U.S., what we experience, the reason why I say the United States is such an amazing country, because this is not normal.
Yes.
Like, unless you travel outside of the United States, most people just cannot comprehend how amazing this country is. It's just not, this is not normal. This is not the world's normal, right? But because it's such an amazing country, we have all these little niches and these opportunities that get driven by kind of some of the things that we're experiencing today, right? But a lot of it is just driven by the freedoms that we have, man, to be able to go out and create. So with that said, Airbnb short-term rentals is one of them. And I never truthfully would have even considered that space unless we kind of went through this cycle. And of course, the cheap 30-year fixed rate money, right? Because that 30-year money, man, when it's that cheap, it solves a lot of problems. It addresses a lot of risk. Because you have a lot of time to figure stuff out in 30 years when you're cost of debt is fixed, right? I mean, you can even parachute me in there, man, and I'll figure that out. Oh gosh. God bless us all, man. God bless us all. Okay, so I agree. I agree with you, man, and I really appreciate what you said. So talk a little bit about some of the nuances that you're seeing. And I know we're approaching the end of the show, so we got to start winding this down. But this has been I think, a very fascinating conversation because very different. But it also reflects a lot of things that people are hearing around hospitality, okay, and some of the distressed opportunities that might be there. Well, the cool thing about having you on is not only have you helped validate that, but you've also explained and been very good at articulating how you're positioning yourself for that, but more importantly, what you've actually done to be able to capture opportunity as it pops up, right? And you've given some great examples for that. So, in my mind, I listen to the things that you say and I go, okay, this guy has created a couple different options, even with his existing assets as apartment buildings, right? So if you're in core markets and, say they're smaller apartment buildings, 20 to 50 units, and you're in a core market, well-located property, hey, it might make sense to start rethinking because the demand has shifted to some degree about how you can utilize some of those as Airbnbs, right? Because to your point, you're 4Xing revenue. So if you typically are generating on a per unit basis $800, and now you can convert that, man, to $3,200. Okay, well, it might make sense taking that risk, right? Leaving 4 units available for Airbnb because it offsets the risk, man, when you're 4Xing your revenue, even if you have 2 others vacant, right? I mean, it's just, some of this stuff is just amazing when you think about it. So very, very cool conversation, man. So with that said, I know we're approaching the end of our show, man. You've been a tremendous guest, and I want to thank you for that. Where do you see the opportunity going forward?
So the opportunity is shifting. I think as we start to kind of go on the downside of this bell curve, we're going to start to see commercial spaces, retail spaces, maybe not so much industrial, but office spaces really start to take a hit. And if we can find opportunities to repurpose those types of assets, I think that's going to be kind of like the next, home run space. To give you a small example, there are plenty of mixed use properties out there where the bottom space may be retail and then residential may be above it. Well, those residential spaces, if you can purchase enough of them, for all intents and purposes, we can consider those to be multifamily spaces. And then we can make them either short-term rentals or long-term rentals through a sublease or through an arbitrage method, because primarily the owners may not want to sell them, but they need to produce income. And so I think that's going to be the sweet spot coming up in 2021, 2022, once we start going on the downside of the bell curve.
Awesome, man. Awesome. I really appreciate that. Well, Mike, you have been a great guest, man. Not only have we talked through some amazing opportunities, some amazing strategy, and I think also you've been able to share with our audience some very different perspectives, okay, around this space and also where you're seeing opportunity going forward. And you've given some great concrete examples of what that looks like, right? So for that, man, I want to thank you for that. You've been an amazing guest. So before I ask you to share with our audience how they can get in touch with you, I always like to ask, since I've taken up almost 40 minutes asking you questions, what is the one question that you have of me that you think can add some value to our audience?
Absolutely. I want to know where you think the next opportunity is actually going to be.
Yeah, man. So I really appreciate the question. And I spend a lot of time, I just love data, right? So I spend a lot of time in this markets like this buying data because I think what happens is it helps you make better decisions without the influence of media, right? Media in this country, as amazing as this country is, man, media is unbelievable. It's just fascinating to me how that has evolved over the years, right? So I think my first comment there is those who can make decisions purely around data without being influenced have an advantage in markets like this 100% of the time, right? If we can make decisions based on data without, total influence over just opinions, we create an advantage. Okay. And I think one of those areas, to now forward to your question, is short-term rentals, man, because of how cheap debt is right now. And the market is giving us that. The market's also telling a story. So for me, that's been an opportunity. We've been taking advantage of that. Now that's out. That's what we've been doing, right? There's some challenges there with, caps once you get to 10 properties. But as I always say, either price solves a lot of problems or cheap money can solve a lot of problems. And when you have a 30-year fixed time horizon, you should be able to figure that stuff out in at least a year, right? If not 2 years. If you need more than that, then you're probably not going to qualify for that financing anyway, right? So that's where I see one big opportunity. And so what we have done is we've started adding short-term rentals, man, to our overall portfolio, because to your point, the margins from that, because of how demand is shifting to that right now, has been huge. And truthfully, I don't think that that's going to change very much over time for domestic travelers, right? I think once people get into the habit of that, and now everybody's developing these habits of using short-term housing, okay, as areas for them to go and visit. For one, man, it's too easy. You're just getting too much value for your money. And the delta between a hotel rate and a home rate, I just don't see why anyone would stop going down that path, right? I think it's just a very unique opportunity. And so that's an area that I see as a pretty good opportunity. I think that, of course, that's going to shift, meaning the margins are going to compress. But as long as, money is in the 2.75 to 3.25% range, I just don't see why you would not take advantage of that. To me, it's mind-boggling, It's just mind-boggling. So that would be the opportunity, the most, I would say, apparent opportunity that I'm seeing today, and that we've been capitalizing on over the past 4 months, man, maybe 5 months.
Nice. I guess it's to summarize the show, everybody that's listening knows short-term rentals is now the secret sauce.
yeah, it is, right? Yeah, it is. Well, I think you explained it best, right? When you talk about 3Xing or 4Xing your revenue, and you can keep your operating costs relatively consistent. Now, granted, your expense ratio is going to go up because, you just have more turn, right? You're not dealing in, a 6-month lease or a 12-month lease or even a 90-day lease. You're turning units usually every 4 days or 3 days. And so consequently, you're just going to have more costs. But when you're 4Xing your revenue, man, and you're increasing your expense ratio by maybe another 10%, that's just margin, right? It's hard to ignore that. Even I understand that. So, hey, man, I really appreciate you. Mike, how do people get in touch with you, bud?
Absolutely. So you can find me on social media, on Instagram at michael.s.glaspie, Facebook at MikeG2. You can visit any one of my companies, militarycashflow.com, 5PillarsRealtyGroup.com, or ArcherMeetings.international.com. Or you can find me on Amazon and find my book on Amazon as well, under Michael Glaspie 2.
All right, man. Hey, you've been tremendous. Mike, I want to wish you continued success. Look forward to having you back on, when, you've acquired your 10th apartment building.
I love it. I'm ready for it.
All right, man. All right. Thank you, man. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Clarity of purpose creates our greatest competitive advantage. When we transform apartment buildings to thriving communities, we improve how people live and create assets with high profit margins. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this up with a friend. I'm John Brackett, bringing you things you can implement right away.